The look on my daughter-in-law's face when the auctioneer leaned in and whispered that question, "Does she know?" is something I'm going to carry with me to my grave. It wasn't a look of confusion, not at first. It was a look of supreme, unearned confidence starting to crack at the edges like cheap veneer. She stood there in her expensive, high-waisted leggings, holding a green smoothie like it was a scepter, presiding over the ruins of my life's work. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally cleared out the clutter of the old man who lived in the back room of his own house. But to understand why that moment felt like the most divine justice I've ever tasted, I have to take you back to the beginning, to the sawdust and the sweat that built the very floor she was standing on. I spent 42 years as a master carpenter and independent contractor. I didn't just build houses, I built reputations. I'm the kind of man who believes that if a joint isn't tight enough to hold water, it isn't finished. When I retired 5 years ago, after my wife Martha passed away, I poured all that remaining energy into my sanctuary, the garage. It wasn't just a place to park a car. It was a 1,200 square foot climate-controlled workshop, and the crown jewel of that shop was my workbench. I spent 3 years building it. It was 12 feet of solid African bubinga and rock maple, weighing nearly 800 pounds. It had twin-screw Hovarder vices, brass inlays that I'd turned myself, and a surface so flat you could calibrate a laser off it. To a layman, it was a table. To anyone who knew anything about the craft, it was a $15,000 masterpiece, an heirloom that would outlast the house itself. When my son, Mark, asked if he and his new wife, Chloe, could move into the main house after his tech startup hit a rough patch, I didn't hesitate. I moved into the finished suite over the garage. I wanted to help. I'd worked double shifts for 20 years to make sure Mark never had a student loan, and I figured this was just what fathers do. I told them the house was theirs to live in, but the garage was my territory. Don't touch the tools and don't touch the bench, I told them. Mark nodded, looking a bit embarrassed, but Chloe just smiled that thin, polite smile she uses when she's waiting for you to stop talking. That should have been my wake-up call, but I kept telling myself it was just a generational gap, a misunderstanding of values. The first year was manageable, though the cracks started appearing early. It began with little things. I'd come home from a morning walk to find a bag of potting soil sitting on my bubinga workbench. Then it was a stack of Chloe's delivery boxes piled high against my table saw. When I asked her to move them, she'd sigh, a long, theatrical sound as if I were asking her to move a mountain. "It's just so much space for one person, Arthur," she'd say, her eyes scanning my shop with a predatory kind of boredom. "Think of the potential this room has. It has the best natural light on the property." I told her the only potential this room had was for making fine furniture, and I left it at that. I thought the boundaries were clear. I thought my son would back me up. But Mark had become a ghost in his own house, always wearing noise-canceling headphones, always on a call, always deferring to Chloe to avoid the inevitable storm of her temper. He'd stopped calling me Dad and started calling me Arthur in front of her, as if to distance himself from the man who still had grease under his fingernails. The escalation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate encroaching of territory. If that was all, I probably would have let it go. But then came the incident with my grandfather's hand planes. I found them in the backyard. Chloe had decided to use the antique wooden bodies as rustic planters for her succulents. She drilled holes right through the base of 100-year-old Stanley tools. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She laughed. "They were just sitting in a drawer, Arthur. I'm trying to bring some life into this dreary old place. You should thank me." And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father or a provider. They saw me as a tenant who was taking up valuable real estate. They saw my life's work as junk. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't yell. I didn't lose my cool. I simply picked up the ruined tools, went to my room, and started making calls. The big opportunity came 2 months ago. Chloe's brand, she's an aspiring wellness influencer with a following mostly made up of bots, needed a flagship location. She wanted a home yoga and meditation studio. She didn't want to rent a space, she wanted mine. She spent weeks dropping hints about how unhealthy the sawdust was for the house and how the garage was dead energy. I ignored it all. I had a 3-week fishing trip to Alaska planned, a trip I'd been saving for since before I retired. "You kids have the house to yourselves," I told them as I packed my bags. "I'll see you in 21 days. Just leave the garage locked." Mark looked me in the eye and promised. Chloe just smiled. That was the most dangerous smile I've ever seen. I wasn't 3 days into the Alaskan wilderness when my smart security system started buzzing my phone. I had cameras in the shop, hidden ones I'd installed years ago to keep an eye on my high-end equipment. I sat in a lodge in Juneau, watching on a tiny screen as a crew of 4 men hauled my heavy machinery out into the driveway. I watched as Chloe pointed at my Bubingo workbench, gesturing wildly, and then I watched as an auction house truck backed up to the door. She wasn't just moving my things, she was liquidating them. I could have called the police right then. I could have called Mark and screamed. But I've learned that when you're dealing with people who have no respect, a quick explosion is just a temporary fix. They'll just play the victim. No, I wanted something more permanent. I wanted to ensure that she never felt entitled to a single square inch of my life ever again. I called my lawyer, Sarah. I've known Sarah for 30 years. I told her exactly what was happening. Then I called an old friend, Miller, who runs the premier high-end tool and antique auction house in the state. I knew the crew Chloe had hired. They were bottom feeders, the kind of guys who sell storage locker finds. They wouldn't know the value of what they had. Miller, I said, a truck is going to show up at your loading dock in about 2 days. It's going to have a 12-foot Bubingo workbench and about 30 grand worth of Festool and Powermatic machinery. A woman named Chloe is going to try to sell it for quick cash to fund a renovation. I want you to take the consignment. Miller was silent for a second. Artie, that's your bench. You built that. Why on earth would I let her sell it? Because, I said, my voice cold and steady, she's going to sign a document stating she has the legal right to sell it. And when she does that, she's going to hand me the keys to her own destruction. Take the consignment, Miller. List it. But make sure the grand auction happens the day I get back. I spent the next 2 weeks in Alaska, fishing in silence. My heart wasn't in the salmon. It was in the legal documents Sarah was drafting. You see, the house wasn't just mine. I had placed it into a very specific type of living trust years ago. The terms were clear. Any unauthorized alteration to the structure or disposal of permanent fixtures, and that workbench was bolted into the foundation with 6-inch lag bolts, constituted a breach of the residency agreement I had with my son. More importantly, selling property that isn't yours is a felony. I flew back on a Tuesday. I didn't go home. I went straight to Miller's auction house. The Grand Wellness Studio was set to open that Saturday, and Chloe had already spent the advance money she'd gotten from the auction house on mirrors, bamboo flooring, and a $5,000 lighting system for the garage. When I walked into the auction house, Miller was standing by my bench. It looked beautiful under the gallery lights. A small crowd of serious woodworkers was gathered around it, whispering in hushed tones. Chloe was there too, wearing a white linen outfit, looking like she'd already ascended to a higher plane of existence. She saw me and her face went pale, then immediately shifted into a mask of faux sympathy. "Arthur, you're back early," she said, gliding over. "Listen, we had a bit of a disaster while you were gone. A pipe burst in the garage and everything was ruined. The insurance company said we had to clear it out immediately for mold remediation. I managed to save what I could and get some value for it to help with the repairs. I was going to tell you tonight." She was lying through her teeth, and she didn't even blink. "A pipe burst, huh?" I said, running my hand along the smooth Bubinga, "in a room with no plumbing?" She didn't miss a beat. "It was an HVAC leak, very technical. Anyway, I'm so glad you're here to see the silver lining. This old table is actually going for a lot of money. It'll cover the whole new studio." That's when Miller stepped forward. He looked at the clipboard, then at Chloe, then at me. He knew the truth. He'd seen the titles and the receipts I'd sent him. He looked Chloe dead in the eye and asked the question. "Does she know?" Chloe frowned. "Know what?" "I'm the consigner. I signed the papers." "Does she know," Miller repeated, his voice booming so the whole room could hear, "that this table is a registered work of art with a documented valuation of $15,000? And does she know that selling a permanent fixture of a deeded property without the owner's signature is technically grand larceny?" The silence that followed was deafening. The smirk on Chloe's face didn't just fade, it disintegrated. The color drained from her cheeks until she was as white as her linen suit. She looked at me, her jaw dropping. "Arthur, he's joking, right? We're family." "Family doesn't sell a man's soul while he's on vacation, Chloe," I said.
My voice was quiet, which made it 10 times more terrifying. And family doesn't lie about burst pipes to cover up their greed. I pulled a manila envelope from my coat pocket. This is a cease and desist. It's also a notice of eviction for both you and Mark. You breached the trust agreement the moment you unbolted this bench from my floor. The auction is canceled. The equipment is being loaded back onto a truck you're going to pay for. You can't do this, she stammered, her wellness persona completely gone, replaced by a shrill, desperate entitlement. I've already spent the money. The mirrors are installed. The flooring is glued down. I have a launch event in 3 days.
Then I suggest you get a scraper, I said, because by Friday, that garage needs to be empty. Not of my tools, of your mirrors. If there is so much as a speck of bamboo left on my concrete, I'm moving forward with the criminal charges for the theft of the bench. I have the footage, Chloe. I watched you point at it. I watched you sign the contract. Mark arrived 10 minutes later, looking like a man who had already lost everything. He tried the "Dad, please" routine. He tried to tell me Chloe just got carried away with her vision. I looked at my son, the boy I'd built a playhouse for, the man I'd given a debt-free start in life, and I felt a profound sense of pity. Mark, you let her sell my life's work so she could have a place to take selfies. You stood by and watched. You're not a victim here. You're an accomplice. You have 72 hours to get your things out of my house. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of frantic activity. I sat on my porch in a lawn chair, watching as the Zen space was dismantled. The expensive mirrors were shattered in the rush to move them. The bamboo flooring was ripped up in jagged pieces. Chloe was screaming at the movers, screaming at Mark, and occasionally screaming at me. I just sipped my coffee. When the garage was finally empty, I had a professional crew move my bench and my machinery back in. It took 6 men to bolt that Bubinga beauty back into the concrete. I spent the evening cleaning and oiling the surface, restoring the luster that Chloe's delivery boxes had dulled. The house is quiet now, terribly quiet, but it's a peaceful kind of silence. Mark and Chloe are living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. From what I hear, the wellness brand folded before it even started. Mark reached out a few weeks ago, testing the waters, asking if I wanted to come over for Sunday dinner. I told him I was busy. I told him I had a new project in the works, a set of dining chairs for a client who actually understands the value of a hand-cut dovetail. I am not a vindictive man by nature. I didn't want to lose my son. But respect isn't something you get just because you share a last name. It's something you earn. And if you can't earn it, you'd better at least have the sense not to steal it. My shop is back to the way it was, smelling of cedar and oil, the light hitting the Bubinga just right in the afternoon. I'm 68 years old, and I finally learned the most important lesson of all. You can build a lot of things with the right tools, but you can't build a relationship with someone who sees you as a stepping stone. My son calls every Sunday now. He's very polite. He asks about my health. He asks if I need help with the yard. Funny how that works. It's amazing how much clearer people can see you once you stop letting them walk all over you. I haven't invited him back to the house yet. Maybe one day. But for now, I have work to do. And the bench, it's never looked better.